The Whitmore Middle School 7th grade science trip to the Hargrove Natural History and Science Center had been planned for 11 weeks, which was the amount of lead time that Naomi Patterson had determined in her 11 years of planning. It was the correct lead time for a field trip that required a confirmed reservation at a popular institution. 27 signed permission slips from 27 7th grade families. 2 chaperonal confirmations, a completed and submitted field trip protocol binder, and the specific curriculum coordination with Dr. Nakamura that ensured the tour aligned with what the students had been learning since February. 11 weeks had been enough, with 1 extra week of buffer for the student who always submitted the permission slip late, which this year was a student named Jordan, who had submitted it on the second to last day of the window, which was still within the window, and which Naomi had accepted without comment because the window existed for exactly this reason. It was an annual event. The 7th grade science trip had been an annual event at Whitmore for 14 years, and this year's trip was the specific culmination of the unit on ecosystems and biodiversity that the 7th grade science teacher had spent the first 2 months of the spring semester building the unit that included the Habitat Diorama Project and the Species Identification Lab, and the field journal entries that the students had been writing since February. The unit that led, as it always led in its 14-year history, to the bus ride to the Science Center, and the 4-hour guided tour and the lunch in the atrium, and the specific experience of seeing in 3 dimensions and at scale what they had been studying in 2 dimensions and in miniature. Naomi Elise Patterson had been teaching 7th grade science at Whitmore Middle School for 11 years. She was 39 medium height and direct in the specific way of people who have spent years communicating clearly to 12-year-olds who require clarity above all other rhetorical virtues. And she had the specific quality of a teacher who had chosen teaching deliberately after a series of experiences that had made the choice obvious rather than compromised. She had a master's degree in biology from the State University, had spent 2 years in a research lab studying insect population dynamics, had realized in the 2nd year of the lab that what she wanted to do with the research was explain it to people who did not yet know it, and had gone into teaching at 28 with the specific orientation of someone who understood their subject deeply and wanted to communicate that understanding, which was the orientation that produced in students who had her. The sense that science was not a collection of facts to be memorized, but a way of looking at the world that once learned could not be unlearned. She had taught 22 cohorts of 7th graders in 11 years, approximately 600 students total. The count varied because each cohort's size varied, and because in 1 year the school had split a large cohort across 2 sections. And because she did not actually track the number, she simply knew it was approximately 600, in the way you know things that you haven't calculated but that you are aware of in the general sense. And she was aware that the 600 were people who were now in high school and college, and some of them in the years after college, and that the science they had learned in 7th grade was part of what they carried into those years, and that the part they carried was not the specific taxonomy she had taught, and not the specific lab procedures, but the way of looking, the orientation toward the world as a thing to be understood, rather than accepted as a structure that yields to patient attention and careful observation, as something that is larger than any room you have ever been in, but that can be approached one question at a time. She had taken 22 trips to the Hargrove Natural History and Science Center, though 2 had been virtual during the pandemic years and did not count in the same way. She knew the Science Center the way you know a place you have been visiting for a decade, the specific route from the bus drop to the main entrance, the location of the biodiversity gallery on the 2nd floor, the way the light fell in the rainforest diorama room in the late morning, the cafeteria's layout, and the fact that the 2nd line on the right was always faster. She knew the center's education director, a woman named Dr. Claire Nakamura, whom she had been collaborating with for 7 years on curriculum alignment, which meant that the 7th grade science unit and the Science Center's exhibit structure were designed to fit together in the specific, complementary way of things that have been built in coordination. The collaboration had begun at a district professional development day in Naomi's 4th year of teaching when Dr. Nakamura had presented the Science Center's educational programming, and Naomi had asked after the presentation whether the programming was designed to articulate with any specific part of the 7th grade science curriculum. Nakamura had said not specifically. Naomi had said, "I'd like to change that if you're willing." Nakamura had said, "I've been waiting for someone to ask that question for 6 years. They had met for coffee the following Tuesday, and had been meeting roughly monthly ever since, and the curriculum alignment that had resulted was one of the things Naomi was most proud of in 11 years of teaching. Not because it had been technically complex, which it had not, but because it had required the specific willingness to go beyond the job description in the direction of the thing the job was, for which was for 7th graders to understand science. And the curriculum alignment served that directly, and Naomi had the specific kind of professional satisfaction of someone who has made the thing the job is for more possible. She had grown up in the same city where she now taught 2 districts south of Whitmore in a neighborhood where her parents had lived since before she was born, her father a high school math teacher for 31 years. Her mother an emergency room nurse for 28 years. Both of them people who had built their professional lives in public institutions that required in different ways the same thing: the ability to show up in a system and do good work in it, and to maintain through the years of showing up the specific integrity that comes from knowing what you are doing and why. She had absorbed this from them the way children absorb things from parents who do not lecture through proximity, through watching, through the specific experience of being raised in a house where the standard was clear and was met and was expected to be met. She had gone to the State University for biology, which had been the obvious choice from the moment she was 14, and had completed the summer science camp at the same university, and had understood sitting in a university laboratory for the first time that the world was more structured and more interesting and more explicable than she had previously known, and that the structure and the interest and the explicability were things she wanted to spend her life understanding and communicating. She had done the research lab for 2 years after the master's degree, and had found in the 2nd year the specific limitation of research, which was that the knowledge it produced was not in its primary form accessible to the people who most needed it, and that the translation from research to understanding was work that someone needed to do, and that she wanted to be the person who did it. She had gone into teaching at 28 and had been teaching 7th grade science since then. At Whitmore 11 years, and she had never once in those 11 years arrived at a Monday morning doubting the choice. She was also outside of these things, a person who had been a black woman in the world for 39 years, and who had developed through that experience the specific knowledge of a person who has navigated institutions and public spaces and encounters that required the particular combination of patience and precision and composure that the encounters required, which was not a pleasant form of knowledge to have acquired, but which was real, and which she carried, and which she drew on when she needed to draw on it without making a display of drawing on it. The 7th grade class that she was taking to the Science Center on this Thursday in April had 27 students. She knew them. She knew them in the specific way that science teachers know the students they have taught for 9 months by name, by the quality of their attention, by their particular questions, and the particular gaps in their understanding, and the particular things they had surprised her by understanding by their voices in discussion and their handwriting in their field journals, and their specific ways of being in a lab. She knew which students needed to sit near the front to stay engaged and which needed space in the back to think. She knew which students would ask the first question in a discussion and which would ask the better question 20 minutes later. She knew Marcus Chen's handwriting, which was tight and precise and specific, and which matched the way he thought, and Destiny Williams' handwriting, which was larger and more expressive, and which matched the way she thought, and she knew 25 others with the same specificity. This was the knowledge that produced the good teaching, which was not the knowledge of the subject that was also necessary, but the knowledge of the specific people who were learning it, which was what allowed the subject to meet the person. She had 27 students. She had a list of their names on a clipboard. She had 26 signed permission slips because one student's parent had submitted the permission electronically via the school's portal, which was acceptable and which she had confirmed with the front office. She had the contact information for every parent or guardian. She had 2 chaperones, parents of 7th graders who had volunteered through the class parent coordinator, and she had the school's standard field trip protocol binder, which she had completed and signed and submitted to the assistant principal the previous Thursday. She had done this 11 times. She knew what she was doing. She knew it the way you know things you have done 11 times, and that you have also been thinking about for 11 weeks. Not just the logistics which she could have managed in her sleep, but the purpose which she revisited every year before the trip, because revisiting the purpose was how she kept the logistics in their correct position, which was secondary. The purpose was for 27 7th graders to see at scale what they had been learning at desk size, and to have the specific experience of scale that a classroom cannot provide, which was the experience of standing in front of something that is larger than you and feeling in your body, rather than in your mind, the specific dimensions of what you are learning about. That was the purpose. She had been thinking about it for 11 weeks. She was going to produce it today. The bus dropped them at the Science Center's main entrance at 9:45, which was 15 minutes later than planned because of traffic on the connector road between the school and the highway, and which was not a problem because Dr. Nakamura had been informed of the possible delay and had held the 9:30 guided tour orientation by 15 minutes, which was something Science Center educators did for school groups, because school group arrival times were variable, and because holding the orientation was a 5-minute accommodation and releasing 27 7th graders into the Science Center's exhibits without orientation was a different kind of problem. The students got off the bus in the order they had been assigned, which was the order of the seating chart which Naomi had designed to minimize the specific friction of bus trips with 7th graders, which was the friction of who sat next to whom and what that produced in terms of noise and distraction, and the management of energy that was genuine excitement expressed in ways that required management. She had managed 7th-grade energy for 11 years. She managed it now efficiently with the specific lightness of someone who takes it seriously without making it oppressive, who keeps the energy and redirects it rather than suppressing it. She counted the students off the bus. 27. She led them up the main entrance steps. The Science Center's main entrance was a broad set of stone steps, 12 steps wide enough to accommodate a school group leading to a set of glass doors, and on either side of the glass doors were the 2 planters with the specific native plantings that Naomi had mentioned to the class during the discussion of regional ecosystem identification, because the planters were native ecosystem examples, and because she tried to make the trip a continuation of the classroom rather than a departure from it. They went through the glass doors. The lobby was the large, light-filled atrium with the whale skeleton suspended from the ceiling that was the building's iconic element, the thing that every visitor photograph included, the thing that her students, all 27 of them, looked up at when they came through the doors, even the ones who had been to the Science Center before, because the whale skeleton was the kind of thing that does not get smaller the second time you see it. Dr. Nakamura was waiting for them in the lobby. She said, "Good morning, Ms. Patterson." She said, "Good morning, 7th grade." She said it with the specific warmth of a person who has been doing educational programming for a long time and who genuinely likes 7th graders, which is a particular type of person that not everyone is. Naomi said, "Good morning, Dr. Nakamura." She said, "We're 15 minutes late." She said it as information, not as apology, because the delay had not been her fault, and because Dr. Nakamura already knew about the delay and had accommodated it, and unnecessary apology was a form of performance that she had stopped performing some years ago. They proceeded toward the orientation room, which was on the lobby level, a room off the left side of the atrium. The 27 students moved in the organized, loose cluster that Naomi's field trip management produced, not a strict line, which was unnecessary, and which the Science Center's open layout did not require, but not a scatter, which produced the specific chaos of 27 seventh graders in an unmanaged configuration in a public building. She moved them toward the orientation room. She did what she always did at this moment, which was to let the students move at the pace of their interest. Some of them were already looking up at the whale skeleton, which was correct and which she had counted on. Because the whale skeleton was the orienting experience, and the orienting experience was the entrance into the day while maintaining the general direction and the general order that kept 27, 12, and 13-year-olds from distributing themselves across the atrium in a way that would require management. She had done this 11 times. She knew the pace, she knew the direction. She knew the whale skeleton's effect on 7th graders, which was reliable. They went through the glass doors into the atrium and into the whale skeleton and into the specific quality of the light in that space, which was the quality that Naomi had been thinking about since February. The light of the atrium, the height of the ceilings, the way the building's architecture communicated the scale of the natural world that the building was designed to hold. She had been thinking about it because the unit's culminating question, the question she had built the unit toward the question that the field trip was designed to make tangible, was the question of scale. How do you understand the scale of ecosystems when the scale of ecosystems is larger than any room you have ever been in? The Science Center's atrium, with the whale skeleton suspended at the height of 3 stories, was one answer. The rainforest diorama room, which replicated an ecosystem in 3 dimensions from the forest floor to the canopy, was another. The biodiversity gallery, which displayed 4,000 species in a single corridor, was a third. She had designed the unit to use all 3. She had been thinking about this for 11 weeks. Officer Michael Greer was standing near the information desk on the right side of the atrium. He was 33, contracted security for the Science Center, not a city police officer, but a contracted security officer from a private firm, Meridian Security Services, that provided uniformed security to the city's cultural institutions under a municipal contract that had been in place for 6 years, and that included the Natural History and Science Center, the City Art Museum, and 3 smaller institutions. The contract specified in Section 4 the protocols for interaction with authorized visitors, which included school groups and which required contracted personnel to verify authorization through the institution's programming office, rather than through independent assessment of the group. Greer had been at the Science Center for 8 months on the lobby and atrium level, and he knew the rhythm of the building's daily operations and the specific patterns of school group arrivals, which were frequent and which followed a recognizable sequence bus outside organized cluster, entering educator in front with clipboard. He had seen this sequence many times. He had seen it this morning. He had seen Naomi Patterson with her clipboard and 27 students in organized formation, and he had walked across the atrium toward her anyway. He had seen this specific cluster enter. He had seen Naomi Patterson, clipboard in hand, leading 27 7th graders toward the orientation room. He had seen at the same time a man at the gift shop on the far side of the lobby, a customer who was not part of the school group who had his back to the atrium and was looking at the display near the register. The man was black in his 40s, wearing a jacket and slacks. He had no connection to the school group. He was a museum visitor. Greer walked across the atrium toward Naomi. He said, "Excuse me." He said it to her. He said, "Are all of these kids with you?" She said, "Yes, all 27. She showed him the clipboard. She said, "Whitmore Middle School 7th grade science field trip, confirmed reservation with Dr. Nakamura." He said, "You're the teacher." She said, "Yes, my name is Naomi Patterson." She said it clearly, the way she said things that were direct. He said, "I need to see some ID." She said, "I have a school ID." She reached into her bag and produced the Whitmore Middle School staff identification card with her photograph and name and the school's seal on the front. She held it out. He looked at it. He said, "This is a field trip." She said, "Yes." She said, "I've spoken with Dr. Nakamura, the education director. She is expecting us." He said, "I'm going to need you to wait here." She said, "We are 15 minutes behind schedule." She said, "We have a 4-hour guided tour booked." She said, Dr. Nakamura is in the orientation room. He said, ma'am, I need you to wait here. He said, there are some concerns about the group. She said, what concerns? He said, I've received a report about the group. She said, what report? She said, from whom? He did not answer the question. He said, I'm going to need to verify a few things. He moved to her left side. He said, can you step to the side for a moment? One of the students, a girl named Destiny Williams, 12 years old, who had been standing close enough to hear, said, Ms. Patterson, is everything okay? Naomi said, yes, Destiny. She said it with the specific tone that kept 27 seventh graders in the appropriate register for a public building while also communicating to Destiny that she had heard the question and that the situation was being managed. She said, everyone, please continue toward the orientation room. She said to her chaperones, a woman named Berenice Okafor and a man named Thomas Lee. She said, Berenice Thomas, please take the group to the orientation room. Dr. Nakamura knows you're coming. Berenice Okafor looked at Naomi. She was 43, a pediatric social worker with 16 years of experience in situations that required the reading of what was actually happening, rather than what was stated to be happening. And she understood immediately what was happening and what the correct response was, which was to get the students to the orientation room and to trust Naomi to handle the situation, because Naomi had been handling situations for 11 years and had the specific composure of someone who knew what she was doing and who did not need someone to intervene on her behalf, but who needed her chaperone to take the students where they were supposed to go. Thomas Lee beside her understood the same thing without the professional vocabulary. For it, he understood it in the way of a parent who has been watching a teacher operate for 9 months and who knows from watching what the teacher can handle. He nodded at Naomi. She nodded back. Berenice said, We'll see you in a few minutes. Thomas said we've got them. They took the students to the orientation room. All 25 of the remaining students went, including 3 who had been watching what was happening with Greer, and who went when Berenice said, Come on. And because Berenice had the specific authority of a pediatric social worker who has been managing groups of children in difficult circumstances for 16 years, Naomi turned back to Greer. She said, What is the specific concern? He said, We had a report of an unauthorized group in the lobby. She said, This is an authorized group. She said, I have a confirmed reservation, 27 students, 2 chaperones, and a school staff identification card. She said, I have spoken personally with the education director. She said, which of those things is unauthorized? He said, I'm going to need to ask you to step outside. She said, on what basis? He said, I'm going to ask you to cooperate. She said, I am cooperating. She said, I am asking you to state the basis for asking a teacher with a confirmed reservation and 27 students in the middle of a school field trip to step outside. She said it clearly and without anger, because anger was not a tool she was going to use in the atrium of the Science Center, with 27 seventh graders potentially watching, some of whom had turned back toward the atrium, because they could sense that something was happening. Because seventh graders always sense when something is happening, which was one of the things she had learned in 11 years of teaching 7th grade. She was calm in the way that she was always calm in situations that required it, which was not a performed calm, but a real one, developed over 39 years of situations that had required it, and that she had navigated by staying calm and thinking clearly and saying what needed to be said. She had been in situations before, at checkpoints, at counters in buildings where someone had looked at her and decided before she spoke that she was a problem to be managed. She recognized the recognition immediately, and she always had from the first encounter when she was 16, and the security guard at the mall had followed her through 3 stores, and she had turned and said, "Can I help you?" And he had said, "I'm just doing my job." And she had said, "Your job is to follow me." She had said it clearly without anger at 16, and she had been saying things clearly without anger in that category of encounter for 23 years, and she knew how to do it, and she did it now. She was aware that Destiny Williams had not gone into the orientation room. She was aware that Destiny had her phone out. She was aware that 3 other students, Marcus Chen Kezia Thomas and a boy named David Park, had also stopped at the atrium entrance and were watching. She was aware that at least 2 of them had their phones visible. She said nothing about the phones. She continued looking at Greer. He said, "You need to step outside with me." He put his hand on her arm. That was when Marcus Chen 13, who had won the school's science fair the previous year with a project on air quality measurement in the school's neighborhood, and who had the specific attentive intelligence of someone who is always recording things even when he does not have a phone, outraised his phone and pressed record. Destiny was already recording. Kezia was recording. David had his phone up. Naomi said, "Please remove your hand." She said it with the specific composure of someone who has been preparing for the possibility of this moment since the moment Greer walked across the atrium, because she had known from the first question what direction the encounter was likely to move, and she had been correct, and she was still composed because composure was what the situation required, and because she had 27 students in the building, 4 of them within eye line, and composure was what she owed them. He said, "I need you to come with me." She said, "I am not leaving my students." She said, "I would like you to call Dr. Nakamura." She said, "Her office number is on the Science Center's educational booking confirmation, which I have in my bag." She said, "Please call her and verify the reservation." He said, "Come with me." He was moving her toward the door. He had both hands on her upper arms. She did not pull away. She walked. She walked the way Dorothy Holloway had walked, in the courthouse, because not walking meant being dragged, and she was not going to be dragged in the atrium of the Hargrove Natural History and Science Center in front of 4 of her 7th graders, and she looked at Destiny Williams as she walked, and she said, "Destiny." She said it in the voice she used when she was giving an instruction that was important. She said, "Go tell Dr. Nakamura what is happening." Destiny's eyes were wide. Destiny went. Destiny. She went with him through the glass doors and onto the steps. She stood at the top of the steps and she looked at him and she said, "I am going to stand here." She said, "You do not have a legal basis for this." She said, "I have 27 students inside who are my responsibility." She said, "You are going to call Dr. Nakamura." She said it the way she said things when they were not negotiable. He said, "You're making this difficult." She said, "I'm being accurate. There's a difference." She said it with the specific clarity of someone who has said true things in difficult situations for 39 years, and who knows the exact weight each word carries. Accurate was not difficult. Difficult was a characterization of her behavior that was not accurate, which was itself an inaccuracy that she was not going to let pass. She said, "I have a confirmed reservation 27 students and a school identification card. I am being accurate." She said it once. She did not say it again. She did not need to say it again. Inside the lobby, Destiny Williams had run to the orientation room. She had gone through the door and said in the specific volume of a 12-year-old who has absorbed something alarming and who is trying to be as clear as she can be, "Dr. Nakamura, someone is making Ms. Patterson go outside." Dr. Claire Nakamura was 51 education director of the Hargrove Natural History and Science Center for 12 years, and she had, in 12 years of running science education programming for a city's school system, developed the specific efficiency of a person who has dealt with every variety of institutional problem and who has learned to respond to new ones with the minimum of time and the maximum of effect. She said, "Everyone please stay seated." She said to Berenice Okafor, "I'll be right back." She went out of the orientation room into the atrium at a pace that was not running and was not walking, and that produced in the students who saw her go the understanding that something was being handled. She went through the glass doors. She saw Naomi on the steps with Greer. She said, "Michael." She said his name the way you say someone's name when you need their full attention, and you do not have time for the alternative. She said, "This is Naomi Patterson. She is the Whitmore 7th grade science teacher. We have been co-designing curriculum together for 7 years. I confirmed her reservation 11 days ago. She said, 'What is happening?' Greer said I received a report. Nakamura said what report? He said a report of an unauthorized group in the lobby. She said this group has been authorized. She said I authorized it. She said my name is Dr. Claire Nakamura, and I am the Director of Education at this institution, and I am telling you that this group is authorized. This teacher is known to me, and there is no basis for any of this. She said it with the specific combination of clarity and authority that comes from 12 years of being the person who makes decisions in this building. She said, "Please go inside." He went inside. She looked at Naomi. She said, "I am so sorry." Naomi said there are 4 students outside. She said they were recording. Nakamura said I saw. She said, "Come back inside." She said, "We have a tour to do." They went back inside. The 4 students, Destiny, Marcus, Kezia, and David, were at the glass doors. Naomi looked at them. She said, "Phones away, please." Marcus put his phone in his pocket, the pocket of the specific efficiency of someone who had done something with it and was done with it. Kezia put hers away. David put his away. Destiny held hers for 2 seconds, the 2 seconds of a 12-year-old who is deciding whether the situation is over, which it was, and then put it away. Naomi said, "Thank you." She said it to all 4 of them. She said it in the tone that meant it and did not require expansion. She said, "Let's go see some exhibits." She had said to Destiny, "Go tell Dr. Nakamura." She had said it because Destiny was 12 and resourceful and had been paying attention, and because telling Dr. Nakamura was the right action, and because she knew. She knew from 11 years of knowing Destiny-type students, who were the specific variety of highly capable and highly attentive student that every science teacher recognizes in the first week of school, that Destiny would do it correctly and completely. She had not been wrong about Destiny. She was not often wrong about the students she had been teaching for 9 months. The tour took 4 hours and 12 minutes, which was 12 minutes longer than scheduled, because the rainforest diorama room produced in 3 students the specific cascade of questions that the diorama was designed to produce, and Naomi had let the questions go, because the questions were exactly the right questions, and the tour guide, a young man named Felipe, who had been doing school tours at the Science Center for 3 years, was answering them completely and correctly. She had learned in 11 years of teaching that the 12 extra minutes of the right questions were worth more than the 12 minutes of the scheduled program that they replaced. The rainforest diorama room was the room that had produced the 12 extra minutes. The room was designed to replicate a section of the Amazon rainforest at 1:8 scale, which still made it a room 40 feet high with a constructed canopy and understory and forest floor, and the specific quality of filtered light that passed through layers of constructed vegetation. The students had gone in and had immediately gone quiet, which was what students did in the rainforest room because the scale of it, 40 feet of forest canopy above the forest floor, was the kind of thing that produced quiet before it produced questions. Then the questions had come. The 3 students who had extended the tour were Amara Rhodes, who asked about the kapok tree's seed dispersal and had not been satisfied with the first answer, which was accurate but incomplete, and had asked the follow-up that the first answer had made possible, which was the question that the tour guide Felipe had been waiting for because it was the question that allowed him to explain the fig-wasp relationship, which was the thing in the rainforest room that he most wanted to explain, and that required the right question to reach. Naomi had watched Amara and Felipe, and had not moved toward the next room. She had let the questions run. Beside her, Marcus Chen had been writing in his field journal, fast and small, the tight, precise handwriting filling the lines. Lunch in the atrium went smoothly. The students ate and talked, and 3 of them, not Marcus or Destiny or Kezia, who were quieter than usual, continued to ask questions about the exhibits, which Naomi answered while eating her sandwich, which was what she did on field trip lunches because the questions were the point and the sandwich could wait. The bus back to Whitmore left the Science Center at 2:10. The students were on the whole in the specific condition of students returning from a good field trip, which was a combination of full and tired and still thinking about things. The condition in which the thinking continues past the experience, and into the return journey, and sometimes past the return journey and into the evening, and sometimes past the evening and into the next morning, which was the condition that field trips were designed to produce, and which Naomi had been facilitating for 11 years, and which this class had produced today, even with the atrium, even with the 14 minutes on the steps. The field trip had been good. She had allowed the questions to run. The kapok tree had been what it always was. The biodiversity gallery had produced 3 students who had stopped at the same display, the tropical insect section, and had not moved for 11 minutes, which was 2 minutes more than the tour allocation and which she had absorbed into the schedule by asking Felipe to condense the transition to the aquatic gallery. He had condensed it. He was a good tour guide. She had sent him a message from the bus excellent tour today. He replied, "Same to you, Ms. Patterson. Your group had the right questions." On the bus back to Whitmore, Marcus Chen sat in his usual seat and did not speak for the first 7 minutes of the ride. Then he said, "Ms. Patterson." She looked at him from the front of the bus. He said, "The footage is going to get out." She looked at him. He said, "Destiny already texted it to her mother." He said her mother texted it to someone at the school board. He said, "I know because Destiny told me." He said it not as a crisis, but as information, the specific information delivery of a 13-year-old who has assessed a situation and is relaying what he has found. She said, "I know Marcus." She said, "Thank you for telling me." She said, "What you and Destiny and Kezia and David did today was the right thing." She said, "You stayed calm, you recorded what happened, and you got the information to the right person." She said, "That is exactly the right thing." He said, "Are you all right?" She said, "I'm all right." She said, "I'm glad you were there." He looked at her for a moment and then looked out the window. He said, "The rainforest diorama was better than I thought it was going to be." She said, "It usually is." He said, "The kapok tree was the biggest thing I've ever seen indoors." She said, "I know." He said, "I want to come back." She said, "I know you do." She said, "I'll find a way." Destiny Williams had texted the footage to her mother at 2:12 from the bus. Her mother, Renita Williams, had watched it on her phone in her office, where she was the Assistant Director of Community Development for the city's 4th District, and had forwarded it to 3 people simultaneously: a journalist at the county paper, a parent from the Whitmore PTA, and her own supervisor. The journalist had published the footage with context by 4:30. The PTA parent had sent it to the Whitmore school parent list at 3:15. Renita's supervisor, who was also a parent of a Whitmore student, had called the superintendent's office at 3:45. By 5 o'clock, the footage had been seen by the school board, the Science Center's communications office, 2 city council members, and 47 members of the public who had found it independently via social media and who had each, in their individual way, understood immediately what they were watching and had shared it with someone else. The footage was on 3 local news outlets by 6 that evening. The Science Center's social media had been contacted by 47 people. The contracted security firm had been contacted by the Science Center's communications office. Greer had been placed on administrative review by 5 o'clock. The Science Center's director, a man named Arthur Whitmore, who had no relation to the middle school, had issued a statement by 7. The Science Center is deeply concerned by the incident that occurred this morning involving Ms. Naomi Patterson and her 7th grade students from Whitmore Middle School. The interaction between our contracted security personnel and Ms. Patterson was wholly inappropriate and without basis. Ms. Patterson and her students were honored guests of this institution and were treated in a manner that was inconsistent with our values and our responsibilities. We are conducting a full review of the incident and of the contracted security relationship that produced it. The Science Center's communications office received 47 social media contacts by 4 in the afternoon. Meridian Security Services received 11 calls. The mayor's office received 3 separate communications from community organizations by 5:30. The city council member for the district that included the Science Center called the Science Center director at 4:15 and said, "I've seen the footage." What happened? Arthur Whitmore, the director said. A contracted security officer removed an authorized teacher from the building without basis. She said, I can see that. She said, what are you going to do about it? He said, I've already started the security review and I've called Dr. Nakamura and I'm issuing a statement tonight. She said, good. She said, I want a complete review of the contracted security relationship on my desk in 2 weeks. He said, you'll have it. She said, I want it in 2 weeks, not 3. He said, 2 weeks. She said, good. She said, how was the tour before all of this? He was quiet for a moment. He said, I'm told the rainforest room produced a 12-minute question cascade that the teacher let run. She said, good. She said, that's what the room is for. The school board heard about the footage before the evening news. The superintendent called the principal of Whitmore Middle School at 4:30. The principal called Naomi at 4:45. She said, are you all right? Naomi said, I'm all right. She said the tour was good. She said the rainforest room got 3 students in a 12-minute cascade that I let run. The principal said I heard. She said the footage is everywhere. Naomi said I know. She said what needs to happen. The principal said nothing from you right now. She said the board is handling it. She said go home, Naomi. Naomi said I have 41 field journals to grade. The principal said they'll keep. Naomi said they actually won't. She said the students write better right after the trip. She said I always grade them the night of. She called her mother from the bus briefly while the students were occupied. Her mother answered on the first ring because her mother always answered on the first ring when Naomi called, because Naomi called often enough that her mother had learned to expect it, and uncommon enough that a call was worth picking up. Her mother said Naomi. She had seen the footage. Naomi said, I'm on the bus with 27 7th graders. She said, I'm fine. Her mother said, I know you're fine. She said, I'm calling to say I know you're fine, and I'm glad you're fine. She said, your father called me about the footage. Naomi said, what did he say? Her mother said he said, that's my daughter. He said it 3 times. Naomi said, tell him I'll call tonight. Her mother said, he knows. She said, go take care of your students. Naomi said, I will. She said the rainforest room was excellent. Her mother said it always is. She graded them at the kitchen table. She made tea and she graded 27 field journals reading what the students had written about what they had seen, reading their specific observations in their specific voices, which were the voices of 7 months of learning how to look at things and describe them in writing, which was the fundamental skill of science and which the field journals had been designed to teach. She read all 27, which took 2 hours and 40 minutes, because she read each one completely and noted the observations and the questions and the specific moments of understanding in the margins of the journal and in her own grading notes, which she kept for each cohort over the course of the year as a record of how each student's understanding was developing, which was the kind of record that took time to build and that produced by May of a school year a complete picture of 27 individual minds engaging with science, which was information that she used in the last quarter's instruction and that she carried forward into her conversations with the 8th grade teachers who would have these students the following year. She read Marcus Chen's journal entry, which was 11 sentences about the rainforest diorama and 2 sentences about the kapok tree, that were the best 2 sentences she had read all year in a 7th grade science journal, and she wrote in the margin, this is the observation. This is what science writing is. She said it in the margin because she meant it, and because he would read the margin comment on Monday, and because Monday was soon enough for him to know. The footage that Marcus, Destiny, Kezia, and David had recorded was not identical. They had been at different positions in the atrium, different distances from the glass doors, and they had started recording at different moments, which meant that the combined footage, when the outlets that received it edited it together, produced a more complete record than any individual clip would have provided. Marcus's clip was the clearest he had been closest, and had the steadiest hand, the specific steadiness of someone who is paying complete attention and who is not afraid. and his clip showed from the moment he started recording Greer's hand on Naomi's upper arm, her posture and her composure, the words she said to Destiny, and then Dr. Nakamura's arrival through the glass doors. Destiny's clip showed the approach before the contact, the moment when Greer walked toward Naomi and told her to step to the side, which provided the beginning that Marcus's clip did not have. Together, the clips showed the complete sequence from approach to Dr. Nakamura's intervention, in a total of 4 minutes and 37 seconds of footage that was by the Friday morning, the most viewed video in the county, and the subject of a statement from the mayor's office that said the city was committed to ensuring that this kind of incident was not repeated in any institution that received city funding. The security firm removed Greer from the Science Center assignment and placed him on internal review. The firm's review found that Greer had acted outside the scope of his authority and had failed to follow the institution's protocol for interacting with authorized school groups. The review also found in his prior incident reports a single prior incident 8 months ago involving a school group from a different school. Jefferson Elementary 3rd grade, a field trip to the Science Center's children's programming area in which the teacher, a woman named Caroline Yap, had filed a complaint with the Science Center about Greer's manner during entry processing. The complaint described Greer as challenging the teacher's authority over the group without cause and requiring repeated verification that the group was authorized, despite the teacher having produced both a school identification card and a confirmed reservation printout. The complaint had been received by the Science Center's operations office in September and had been filed physically in a paper complaint folder in the operations office's filing cabinet, and had not been reviewed again until the Friday after the April incident, when the operations director pulled all complaint records going back 2 years and found Caroline Yap's 3-paragraph complaint about Michael Greer, 8 months old, in a filing folder that had never been brought to anyone's attention. The director's statement on the second day said this prior complaint was in our records and was not reviewed before today's incident. We are implementing a new review process for contracted security personnel that will include regular supervisory review of any visitor complaints. We apologize to the teacher who filed the prior complaint for our failure to act on it. Caroline Yap had not heard from the Science Center about her complaint in 8 months. She heard from them on the Saturday after the incident when the operations director called her to apologize. She said, "I'm glad Ms. Patterson was there. I'm glad the students recorded it. She said, my students saw the same thing happen to me 8 months ago. They were 8 years old. She said, I filed the complaint because I thought it would do something. It took 8 months and another teacher and 27 7th graders with their phones to make it do something." She said it clearly and without anger, because the anger was not useful, and because the statement was accurate, and because she was a teacher and teachers communicated clearly. Dr. Nakamura called Naomi on the Friday morning. She said, "I want to talk about what we're going to do differently. Not just the security review, I've already started that, but what we're going to do for your class in particular." Naomi said the class is fine. She said the tour was good. Nakamura said the tour was interrupted. Naomi said by 14 minutes. She said the rainforest room made up for it. Nakamura said, "I know." She said, "I want to offer something to the class, specifically, not as a settlement, but as an acknowledgement." She said, "I've been thinking about an after-hours access evening, bring the class back. Just your class, the building to yourselves. Full access to the exhibits with no other visitors." Naomi was quiet for a moment. She said the students would love that. Nakamura said, "I know they would." She said, "I thought you might say yes." Naomi said the kapok tree specifically. Nakamura said, "Of course the kapok tree." Naomi said, "Marcus Chen." Nakamura said, "Who is Marcus Chen?" Naomi said, 13 years old. "The science fair winner, the one who held his phone the steadiest." Nakamura said, "Ah." She said, "I'll put his name on the kapok tree exhibit placard." Naomi said, "Please don't." Nakamura laughed. She said, "Fair enough." She said, "Late May." Naomi said, "Late May." She said, 27 students, 2 chaperones, and a 12-minute question cascade in the rainforest room. Nakamura said, "I'll plan for 15. Marcus Chen asked Naomi on Monday when she handed back the field journals what was going to happen to the security officer. She said, "He's under review." Marcus said, "What does that mean?" She said, "It means someone is looking at what he did and deciding what the consequences should be." Marcus said, "What do you think the consequences should be?" She thought for a moment. She said, "I think the consequences should include reading his prior complaint file and everything else in his record in sequence, not one incident at a time." She said, "I think the thing that happened on Thursday happens because people read things one at a time." Marcus said, "Like how you grade our journals in their sequence, not one at a time." She said, "That's right." He said, "You do that so you can see how the class is understanding as a whole, not just individually." She said, "Yes." He said, "So the security office should do the same thing." She said, "Yes." He looked at his journal for a moment. He said, "Can I put this in my extra credit entry?" She said, "Yes." She said, "Cite your sources." He said, "You're my source." She said, "I know." She said, "Cite me." He said, "Teacher personal communication, April." She said, "That'll work." He said, "What's today's date?" She said, "April 15th. He wrote it in his notebook. She looked at what he wrote because his notebook was open on his desk, and she could see it from where she stood, which was close because she had stopped at his desk with the stack of journals in her arm. The entry in his notebook said, "Teacher personal communication, April 15th. Source science teacher, also the person who stayed calm when the security officer put his hands on her in the atrium and said, 'I'm being accurate. There's a difference.'" He had written it in his tight, precise handwriting. She read it. She said, "That's a good citation." He said, "I know." She said, "That's also good observation." He said, "I've been writing things down since 4th grade." She said, "I know." She moved to the next desk. She said to the next student, a girl named Priya, who had written 8 pages about the aquatic gallery and who had 2 questions in the margins that were better than the questions she'd asked on the tour. She said, "Priya, this observation about the oxygen cycle is exactly right, and the question in the second margin is the right question to ask." She said, "Look it up tonight and bring me what you find on Monday." Priya said, "I already looked it up." She said, "I know." She said, "Bring me what you found." She continued returning journals. 27 students, 27 entries, and Marcus Chen's notebook open on his desk, with the citation he was going to use in the extra credit entry that she was going to read next Thursday, and that she already knew was going to be the best extra credit entry she received this year, which was the specific kind of knowing that 11 years of teaching produces, which was not certainty, but was something close enough to certainty to be useful. The late May after-hours access evening was scheduled for a Tuesday at 6 o'clock. Naomi told the class the Monday before. 23 of the 27 students raised their hands immediately. The other 4 raised their hands 30 seconds later when they understood what they had missed. She said, 27 students. 2 chaperones the building to yourselves after hours. She said, "Bring your field journals." Marcus Chen said the rainforest room. She said, specifically the rainforest room. She said Dr. Nakamura is planning 20 minutes there, minimum with Felipe. Marcus said Felipe, who answered Amara's questions about the fig wasp. She said yes. He said, "How many questions am I allowed this time?" She said 15. He said, "What if I have 17? She said, "Then you have 17, and you pace yourself, and you save the best ones for last." He said, "What if 2 of them are about the fig wasp?" She looked at him. She said, "Those count as 1. He said, "Deal." He said it the way 13-year-olds say deal when they think they've come out ahead in a negotiation which he had, and she knew it, and she did not tell him. They went on a Tuesday evening in late May. The building was quiet in the specific way of a large public building after hours, the specific quality of rooms that are designed to be inhabited and that are in the late evening empty, the particular light of the atrium without the daytime visitors below the whale skeleton, which was still there, suspended in the atrium at the height of 3 stories. Unchanged. The way the whale skeleton is always unchanged regardless of what happens below it, which is one of the things that natural history museums communicate without words. Which is that the whale was here before you and will be here after you, and is not less real for either fact. Naomi stood in the atrium at 6:15 with 27 7th graders, and Dr. Nakamura was beside her, and Felipe was there, and the building was theirs. She had been in this building for 11 years of field trips. She had counted the tour as good. She had graded the journals that night and had written in Marcus Chen's margin, "This is the observation." This is what science writing is. She had come back in late May with 27 students in a building that was quiet and was theirs, and had said to Dr. Nakamura, "The rainforest room first." Nakamura said, "I told Felipe 20 minutes minimum." Naomi said, "We'll need more than 20. Nakamura said, "I know." She said, "I planned for more than 20. Naomi said, "Good." She said, "Let's go." Marcus Chen was the first student through the rainforest room's entrance. He stopped just inside the door and looked up at the kapok tree, which was 40 feet high and which caught the after-hours light from the room's skylights. In the specific way it caught it at this hour, which was different from the way it caught the midday light in April, which was the only time he had seen it before. He said, "It's different at night." Naomi behind him said yes. She said, "That's good observation." He said, "I want to write it down." She said, "Then write it down." He opened his field journal. He wrote it down. The 26 other 7th graders filed in around him and looked up at the kapok tree and the evening light through the skylights, and Naomi stood at the back of the group and watched them look, and she thought, this is the purpose. This is what the 11 weeks and the 27 permission slips and the 14 minutes on the steps and the night grading were for. This room, and these students and the kapok tree and the evening light and Marcus Chen writing it down. The late May evening ran until 9:15. They were supposed to be done by 8:30. Marcus Chen had 17 questions. 2 of them were about the fig wasp, which counted as 1. The rest were 17 in the sense that 17 individual observations about the rainforest room, written in his field journal, in his tight, precise handwriting, generated 17 points of inquiry, which was the specific generative quality of good observation, which was the quality she had been trying to teach since September. He had learned it. The field journal was the proof. She had called her mother from the parking lot at 9:20. Her mother said, "How was it?" Naomi said the kapok tree in the evening light is different from the kapok tree in the morning light. Her mother said, "Is that Marcus Chen's observation or yours?" Naomi said both. Her mother said, "Good." She said, "Your father says tell Marcus he wants to read that field journal." Naomi said, "I'll tell him." She said, "Tell Dad I'm glad he called it right." Her mother said he knew you would be. She said, "Come for dinner Sunday." Naomi said, "I'll be there." She said, "I might bring 27 field journals." Her mother said, "I'll make more food." Naomi said, "I love you." Her mother said, "I know." She said, "Go home, Naomi." She said, "You have class tomorrow." She drove home along the route that passed the Science Center because the Science Center was on the route, and she drove past it with the building in the rearview mirror. The Hargrove Natural History and Science Center, the glass front, the lights still on inside from the after-hours access evening. And she thought about the field journals in the bag in the passenger seat, and about the kapok tree in the evening light, and about Caroline Yap's complaint in the filing cabinet that had taken 8 months and 27 7th graders with phones to reach. She thought about the instruction in her field journal margins. This is the observation. She had been writing that sentence in 7th grade science journals for 11 years. She intended to write it for 11 more, and the 11 after that, and as many after that as she had, because the observation was the beginning, and the beginning was always the same and was always the correct place to start. 27 field journals, 11 years, approximately 600 students. The kapok tree in the evening light in late May. Marcus Anthony Chen's 17 questions, 2 of which were about the fig wasp, which counted as one by prior agreement, and which were both good, and which she had answered correctly, and which he had written down in his field journal in his tight, precise handwriting on the pages after the 2 sentences about the kapok tree that she had written in the margin. This is the observation. This is what science writing is. The whole of it, all of it, every part, and all of it earned, and all of it real, and all of it continuing. She was 39 years old, and she had 11 years of field journals and approximately 600 students and the Science Center's Rainforest Room and Dr. Nakamura and the curriculum alignment they had built together. And Marcus Chen's 17 questions and the kapok tree in the evening light. And she had all of it and intended to keep building it, which she would, which she did, which she was already doing on the drive home with the field journals in the passenger seat and class at 8:30 in the morning. Subscribe our channel. We follow the people who let the questions run 12 extra minutes.